prices are worth the same. Have you ever wondered what drives the value of a car accident claim? I'm John Whatley with the personal injury law firm of Stein Whatley Astorino. I have my partner Rob Astorino here today, and we're going to discuss what's my case worth. Rob and I have helped car accident victims and our team across the states of Kentucky and Indiana for a number of years. And we've seen this question asked both in social media, on websites, but clients have asked us this question, so we thought it might be a good idea to go ahead and discuss that today. Rob, what is the value of my case?
Yeah, I mean, like John said, that's always the question that people ask when they call us. It's very common that people want to know right away, if we go through this process with you, or if we pursue our, car wreck injury case, what it's going to be worth. And unfortunately, there are a lot of, law firms and really just non-lawyer actors in this space that take advantage of that. And they try to, tell you, hey, you just give us your information. We'll tell you what the case is worth. Plug in a few things about what happened and bang, you'll get the number. And I really wish it was that simple, but unfortunately, it's just not. There are a number of factors which can drive the value of your case, some of which are pretty obvious, but also some of which, people don't always think about right away. And, we're going to be giving you some of those secrets today.
Before we move on to those secrets, let's discuss the deceptive part of putting some sort of form on a website where you just plug in a number and punches out a number, and why people should be wary of that.
Sure. A lot of times, we've seen people try to target people after car wrecks with a form about, fill in your injuries, what happened to you, maybe a few other brief questions, and it'll spit out a number of what it's worth. That's simply not realistic. And the reason, like I said, is because there are just so many factors to take into account that they don't have in that form. What's even worse is I've seen ads online, and these are not necessarily even associated with law firms. They're just they're basically middlemen that charge a fee to take your information in and essentially collect it to then give it to attorneys who partner with them. You don't have any control over where that information goes or what attorney that information gets sent to. And there'll be flashy ads like, hey, I wasn't even hurt that bad, and I got hundreds of thousands of dollars. The old adage of, if it seems too good to be true, it probably is, very much is part of this, what is my case worth equation when we're talking about car wrecks, truck wrecks, injuries from motor vehicle accidents. You've got to be careful. Definitely people want things to be done quickly and easily, but if it seems too good to be true, it probably is.
And one of the other things that I think is really astonishing, what's eye-opening to me, is many of the actors that are getting this information or getting your information, they're not even in the United States. Why is that?
Yeah, I mean, some of those videos I've seen on YouTube are things because, since I'm a personal injury attorney, I get targeted with personal injury ads, and these things that are just these ridiculous claims that really make our whole industry look bad, make me upset. So I started clicking on, the accounts that manage these sorts of videos, and oftentimes it'll take you to, United Kingdom or Eastern Europe or India or Russia, something like that, where these people are based out of. I mean, that's where your information's going. And it's hard to know. Some of these places may actually be, legitimate middlemen who are trying to eventually get your information to an attorney. I don't even know if some of them are real, but they're asking for, names, social security numbers, birthdays. You gotta be careful about filling that stuff out in an online form if you don't know, where that stuff is going or who's asking for it.
Yeah, and if they're not subject to the laws and jurisdiction of the United States, you don't have any recourse in the event that that particular individual or organization's not on the up and up.
No, I mean, like John said, best case scenario is that they repackage that information. They then email me to death saying, hey, we have this car accident victim and he needs help. Why don't you, as the attorney, pay us money for that person's information? When in reality, what you need to do is just, call an attorney for the information on the front end. The worst case scenario is your information goes to some data broker out in Russia, and who knows what happens with it at that point.
So best case scenario, try to avoid putting your information on any sort of online forums if possible. Make sure that the organization that is trying to request your information, that you're comfortable that they are a real and legitimate bona fide business, and here, hopefully based in the United States.
Yeah, and a good way to verify that is if they do have, a phone number and a physical address associated with the actual account that's posting, that advertising content. There's all kinds of crazy stuff going on the internet. But I think, as attorneys, we like to help people in any way we can. I view this as trying to help people, but I'm sure, what people really came to see is, the answer to that question
right.
that they actually want to ask. So maybe we should get into that.
Yeah, let's talk about the things that you need to know for what your case is worth. And the first number one driving indicator of value is going to be the severity of your injuries.
Yeah, I mean, we're talking about today, how to value injury cases, and specifically injury cases when you're involved in a motor vehicle wreck. And the biggest driver of the value of the case is what you've ultimately lost. And in a physical injury case, that comes down to, how bad your injuries are. You'll probably have heard advertisements either online or on television over the years of attorneys saying we can recover your medical bills, your lost wages, and your pain and suffering. Well, if your injuries are really severe, your medical bills are going to be higher. So right off the bat, that increases the value of your claim. You're probably going to miss more work with a severe injury, so that also affects the lost wage component of it. And then third, the last category is that pain and suffering, which it's kind of ambiguous, and I don't really like that term. What lawyers say pain and suffering is that's a term that we use with the court, but what it means to real people is what are the things that you can't do anymore, after you get injured? What are the things that you can still do, but you're in pain all the time? The stress of the situation, the difficulties in your life that you didn't have before, other opportunities that you've lost that aren't necessarily related to work, strains on your relationships, those kind of things. That's the kind of things that happen when we're talking about pain and suffering. And the pain and suffering component is going to be worse if your injuries are worse. If you suffer very serious injuries such as, paralysis or losing a limb or even death, those consequences are going to be worse than if you have a minor back strain that, after about 6 to 8 weeks, you don't have pain anymore. It's not saying that case isn't worth anything, but obviously the value of those two cases are going to be dramatically different.
Yeah, and I think it's also, I'm going to drill down a little bit into those subcategories you discussed. Medical bills. You've got your past medical bills. Those obviously are any medical bills that you suffered up to the point in which you are sending a demand to the insurance company or to the at-fault party, demanding certain value. Those things we know what they are because you've received a medical bill at your home, or we've requested those for you on your behalf. Sometimes you get ELBs from insurance, whatever that might be. But those are things that we can identify easily. However, another driver or subcomponent of medical bills are future medical bills. Those are really difficult in many cases for the average person to figure out. In fact, it's difficult for attorneys to figure out. Can you discuss how we ascertain what future medical bills might be?
Yeah, so a good example is if you have a a case where you're in a car wreck and you get a herniated disc, you'll be in some immediate pain from that disc injury in your back, and you'll have to probably go to the hospital, maybe go to physical therapy, maybe get some injections. But by the time we're ready to settle your case, or by the time you're ready to go to trial, maybe you haven't had surgery yet. Maybe you're a young person where they want to wait on having surgery or something like that. But if a doctor has given you the medical opinion that you will likely need surgery in the future, we can tell people, hey, this person, the cost of that surgery is going to need to be factored into this case, even though it hasn't happened yet. That's a future medical cost that is reasonably likely. And that's ultimately what we have to establish, in a case. What you have to establish if you're going to pursue your case, those future medical costs have to be reasonably likely. And it can't just be the person in the wreck saying, I think this is going to happen. There has to be some medical professional to go on the record and say, it's reasonably likely that they would need this surgery in the future. It's reasonably likely that they would need ongoing physical therapy for the rest of their life, that can be a huge cost. And those are the kinds of things regarding future medicals that, it's really important to think about that at the time you're going to settle your case, because they can really change the value.
Right. And just want to make sure that the viewer's clear that if it's reasonably likely, that doesn't mean that your doctor said, well, you could. More importantly, it means that your doctor is, in their opinion, they think it's more likely than not that you will.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yeah, and in the legal world, reasonably likely is always at least a little bit more likely than not.
Right.
So,
likewise, lost wages and earning capacity, loss of earning capacity. Lost wages, we know what those are. They're quantifiable. We know how many days you missed from work, what your salary or your hourly wage is. That's something we can compute. But like medical bills, we're going to have to forecast if you have any restrictions that don't allow you to continue a profession or career that you currently have, or if you are permanently disabled, what the value of that's going to be.
Mm-hmm.
And oftentimes we're going to have to rely on an expert's opinion, maybe an economist, to give us those types of opinions about what that value might be. Again, it can't be where you come out or the injured party comes out and says, hey, I would have made X, Y, Z. We need more than that. The burden of we need more than that. The burden of proof is always on the plaintiff to prove their case.
Yeah, I mean, just for like a really obvious example in that case is if you're like a tradesperson, plumber, electrician, you're making a good income out there, and you get in a car wreck, you become physically disabled, maybe to the point where you can't do any work anymore. If you're 40 years old and you were planning on working until you were 65, like most people, that's a significant income loss. One of the worst that, I've seen in our office was we had a professional client who had a really serious brain injury, and that person's future promotion schedule, what she was going to be able to do was affected by that. It probably cost her hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars of income over the course of her career. And so that's something that, you have to think about after these, and that any, serious future damage to your livelihood is something that can affect the value of your case. And obviously that's not going to be involved in every case. The vast majority of people are able to go back to work, once they've made a recovery. But that is something that can dramatically affect the value of what my case is worth.
Right. You discussed pain and suffering. I know you don't like that term, and I understand why you don't like that term.
Yeah, I just think it's lazy.
Yeah.
There's so much more in there than just saying pain and suffering.
How are there any tools that lawyers can use to help try to ballpark and come up with a figure? Because that's ultimately all we can do as civil attorneys for you, is to get value for a loss. How do we take something that someone is suffering from or dealing with and create some sort of value number?
So there's many ways that we can do this for people, and people can do for themselves. Is really it's just quantifying what that loss is. The people that hit you, the defense attorneys, the insurance companies, they'll always like to use that term pain and suffering because, again, it's lazy, it's nebulous. People think you complain when you throw a term like that around. They don't really feel sorry for you. But when you start getting into what the specifics of your loss is, if you can't take your kids to school anymore because you are physically unable to get them in and out of the car, if you have had a change in your relationship at home, if you can no longer do household chores that you could. I mean, a lot of times these kind of things only happen in more serious cases, but those can be very concrete examples of what people understand to be loss. If you had vacation scheduled that you had to miss, if you are in pain every day, doctors and friends and family can say, their life has changed for the worse. Those are all things that we can use. And the more, it's somewhat crass to say some of these things, but the more pain that you're in and the more your life has changed, the more your case is worth in compensation. And ultimately, that makes sense. The legal system is set up to get more compensation to people who have suffered worse injuries. And when you think about it like that, it really is, it's common sense, it's fairness. The bigger your loss is, the more your compensation should be.
Yeah, and these situations, all these tort claims or personal injury cases are always built on the idea fundamentally that the law is trying to make that injured person whole. And so if you've lost a certain degree of health or enjoyment of life, what is that value that's going to make that person whole again?
Yeah.
To the best extent that we're able to do that.
Sure.
So one of the other things I want to talk about that rarely comes up, because I think most people kind of sort of understand those items that we just talked about, but there's another item that is kind of inside baseball where lawyers are aware of it, but oftentimes people aren't aware of it, and that's liability considerations and comparative negligence. How does that impact the value of a car accident claim?
Yeah, and so now we're starting to get into the things that aren't as common knowledge. I mean, a lot of you probably listening to this are saying, well, thanks for telling me things I already know. If I'm hurt worse, my case is worth more. I'm glad I tuned in. But, these are starting to get into the things people don't necessarily think about as much. First of all, in order to recover at all for a bodily injury claim and not just for certain medical coverage under no fault, the other person has to be responsible for your injuries. If you get into a single car wreck and you were the driver and it's your fault, you can't recover against yourself. So this all assumes that someone else is at least partially at fault. And so if somebody else hits you, it's their fault. There's no issue with, any of these liability concerns. However, if you get into the case where you start arguing about who's at fault, or if people say maybe you're both a little bit at fault, ultimately the value of your case can be reduced if you're partially at fault, because Kentucky and Indiana, almost every state in the country at this point, has a system where if you are partially at fault for the wreck, your overall value gets reduced proportionally. So if you're half at fault, your claim may only be worth half as much. If you're 90% at fault, in some cases, in some states, you can't recover at all. In Kentucky, your claim would get reduced very significantly. So you have to be careful about, some of our other videos, we've explained how to establish the other person is at fault. That doesn't go away when you're talking about how much is the case worth. That's something to consider. Past even just the basic liability concerns is, was the person who injured you acting recklessly? And what I mean by that was, do Do you have video of them on their cell phone, filming one of these in their car? Were they drunk? Did they get out after hitting you? And when police responded to the scene, they blew a .15 on the breathalyzer. Were they a commercial driver who was required to have certain safety considerations and they just didn't do that? Those are all considerations to take into account that can change the value of your case. You may say, well, that doesn't have anything to do with, how bad I'm hurt, but, how you got hurt can change that value as well.
Well, you can have 12 people and an alternate person in a jury in Kentucky, and those people are going to be people from your community, and there's certain things that I think are social norms or other things that are not norms that people look at and create a certain amount of disgust or anger when they see that. For example, I know that we've had a case in the past, okay, you actually mentioned it, DUI, okay? That's something that's totally preventable that really angers people because oftentimes people have read in the news, if they don't have a friend or family member that has died as a result of a drunk driver, they've seen stuff in the news and it's just a horrific story. So the defendant's behavior in drinking and driving can create a certain amount of disgust in a jury that can help elevate the value of a claim. And it's a factor that we consider. We've actually had another claim where not only did the person was drunk at the time of the accident, but later during discovery, in the meantime, while we had litigated this suit, had another DUI. Mm-hmm. And so the value in our minds in somewhat goes up because it's going to make it easier for us risk-wise or probability-wise to now talk to a jury and say, hey, look, this person's still on the street. Not only did they not learn from this first accident, which we might be able to brush away, but they've done it again. And by the way, this is a person driving around in your community where your kids are crossing streets, where you're driving on the road with your family. Mm-hmm. And when it becomes personal for a jury, it makes it much easier for them to find for the plaintiff. And from my standpoint, it's always a great it's not good for that individual, but for the case and the value of the claim, it helps our case.
I would say this is the number one, this is the first real, big secret that I'm sharing about case value that most people wouldn't know about or have any way to know about. There's really two values of every case. There's one value that is most people out there are insured for car wrecks. So 99% of the time when we're doing one of these cases, you're negotiating either with an insurance company or a corporation that's paying for it themselves. And there is a case value that an insurance company or a corporation's risk management department will assign to the case. And they will generally take into account the things that we've talked about, how bad the injury is, what the car looks like after the wreck, which we'll get into in a second, who's at fault, those kind of things. They'll plug it into a little computer program that they've created over the years that they think represents the value of this case, and that's a value that they'll attach to it. There are some other factors that can affect that value that we'll talk about in a minute, but the second value of the case, and the value of the case that attorneys always have to be wary of, is if you go to trial, if you file a lawsuit and you ultimately get in front of a jury of 12 of your peers, what are they going to think this case is worth? And it's really hard to plug that into a computer program. We have some historical records about, jury behavior, that kind of thing that we use to help us out. But that negative defendant conduct, that rarely gets put in to the settlement value. That vastly affects the trial value. And so, when you have an attorney helping you out, try to value this case, that's something that those online forums, they're never going to ask you about what the defendant actually did to you. They're never going to put that in. And if the conduct's bad enough, that can be one of the most important drivers of value in the case. And so, by not taking that into account, both the people who have the settlement value that they're trying to plug into their computer programs and the people out there with those online forums telling you, hey, I think I know what your case is worth, they're going to miss one of the most important things. So it's really important, that you understand there's two competing ways to value cases here. A lot of times they match up, but sometimes they don't. And you really need somebody experienced to help if you fit into one of those situations.
Right. One of the other things we talked about, or I talked about earlier, alluded to, was the plaintiff. We always have the burden of proof to prove our case. And one of the drivers of value can be documentation and evidence. Mm-hmm. The amount of evidence you have, or that you don't have.
Yeah, especially, in disputed liability cases or cases where that defendant conduct is an issue. Pictures of the wreck. We've talked about that a lot in another video about obtaining records, having an attorney obtain records for you. But, we know where to look. Sometimes police take pictures of these things. There's databases you can go on to get documents. It's just, it's endless places to look for things that can help your case. And having all that information and the access to it can increase the value of an identical case. Just having that additional evidence can help out.
Yeah.
And one of the reasons, that it can do that is another thing that can change the value of your case, which I personally don't love, but I do understand, especially when you're talking about that jury value, is what the physical damage to the vehicles involved looks like. If you see, it's common sense. You look at a car that is smashed up, hit by a tractor trailer, and you think, oh, the people in there must be hurt really bad. You look at a car that doesn't have a lot of damage on it. Sometimes you'd say, I can't even tell that car was in a wreck. We have seen cases where people are very seriously injured, where there's barely any visible damage to the car at all. But most people would say, hey, I'm 95% of the time you're fine if you're coming out of that wreck. I'm going in assuming you're not hurt as bad. Identical injuries, if one car is very severely damaged and the other one's not, that can affect the value of the case, even if everything else is the same.
Yeah, the psychology of the juror is very important there. And it's very hard for a juror to look at a car with very little damage and in their mind imagine how the plaintiff was injured. But then no one denies that everybody's seen a car wreck on the side of the road where the car is just mangled and somebody just walked away from it with scratches.
Yeah.
So if the opposite can occur, surely in these wrecks where there's not a lot of damage, at least physical damage to the car, you can also have catastrophic injuries.
The insurance companies are always very quick to point out, the exception to the rule when the car is smashed up really bad. But
right.
They refuse to acknowledge the exception to the rule the other way too.
Right,
so
right.
We have our ways to help on those cases too. Sometimes you can take the bumper off. There's hidden damage to the car. There's physics involved where sometimes if there's no damage to the car, you can actually get hurt worse because the car didn't absorb any of the energy. But that is certainly something that you have to overcome, and it can negatively impact the value of the case.
Well, there's one elephant in the room, and I want to discuss it. You'll never see it. I don't ever see it in any sort of advertising for law firms, but it's the reality of how this industry works. Most cases is the amount of insurance coverage that is available for any sort of injury.
Yeah, that's another thing that can affect the value of the case, especially the settlement value of the case, is the minimum limits for liability in Kentucky and Indiana are $25,000 per person and $50,000 collectively for a wreck. And so what that means is if you're an individual and someone hits your car, your claim could be worth $1 million. And if they have minimum coverage and you don't have any underinsurance coverage, your case is worth $25,000. No, you could be missing an arm, you could be paralyzed, you could be dead. Your case is worth $25,000 because the person who has that minimum coverage, they don't have any way to pay you above that. And so it's unfortunate, but that can be a driver of value. If you have a high value case and a commercial vehicle hits you, or you have uninsured, underinsured coverage, I personally have millions of dollars of uninsured coverage, on my personal auto policy because I know the risk out there. And if you're in a very serious wreck and there's lots of insurance available, or a large company with assets to pay the claim above and beyond insurance hits you, then you can get full value of what that claim's worth. If someone has minimum limits, you may just be out of luck. And then at that point, we're trying to make sure you end up with as much of that money as possible, and not medical providers, other people who may have claims to that money.
Right. That could be a trick to do that well.
It's a whole other video.
Something that I do want to maybe stick a pin in real quick, or maybe dive into, is the whole idea of underinsured, uninsured motorist coverage, why it's so important. I know that we recommend all of our clients when they come through, even if they didn't have it, is say, hey, I'm sorry, this is the best we could do in this particular situation, but in the future, please make sure you have it. We encourage all of our clients to make sure that they have at least some minimum UIM coverage, because it's really for their protection and protection of their family.
And it's not expensive compared to, the minimum limit coverage that you have to have anyway.
Right. The other thing we do for our clients, and as far as I'm aware, I don't know that any other law firms do this, but we're happy to do this for our clients, and we encourage anybody that leaves a comment in here, if you want to reach out to us. We review policy deck pages for a lot of our clients. It doesn't take any time, and kind of explain what is their coverage is and what they do and they don't have, because I understand that for a lot of people, it can be confusing. They think, like, I'm told I've got full coverage. Full coverage might only mean that you have the minimum liability limits for the state of Kentucky to be, or Indiana to be legal on the road, but doesn't necessarily mean you have full coverage that protects you and your family.
Yeah, it's a whole other video that we'll definitely get into, but full coverage is kind of like saying pain and suffering. It means different things to different people.
Right.
There is no actual definition of what full insurance coverage is. And so, like I said, we can talk about that somewhere else. It's probably a whole nother conversation.
It is, absolutely. Can you tell us and discuss maybe the common mistakes that can lower case value for clients? I'll start off, the one that I always see, and it's a stickler for insurance companies, is delay in treatment. They're always going to say, the adjuster's going to say, well, if your client was hurt, why'd they wait a week? Or why did they wait 2 weeks before going to get seen by a medical provider?
Yeah, and hopefully, you see this video before anything happens to you or, a family member. But think about, what you would not believe a stranger, if they were claiming they're hurt really bad. Think about the things that can make you not believe that person. If they did not get medical treatment for several weeks after an incident that they're claiming hurt them really bad, that makes it look like they're not hurt very bad. If they say that the number one thing, in my opinion, that kills value these days, and police are having more and more body cameras, which is great, but the policewoman who investigates your car wreck will likely have a body camera. And if you get out of the car and say, I am totally fine, it could come out. You can get an x-ray that shows you got a broken bone. You can get an MRI that shows you got a herniated discs. People are going to look at that body camera right after the wreck happens, and they're going to say, they said they were fine. They said they were fine on tape. And one of the issues is that your adrenaline after a wreck kicks right in, and you don't always know how badly you're hurt. So I always tell people, please, please, please don't say at the scene, I'm not hurt. You really just don't know yet. And I'm sure what those people mean. We've had clients tell us after it was done, what I really meant was, I'm not missing an arm. I can walk.
Not dying.
Right. I'm not bleeding out on the side of the road, so right. I'm fine. But with that being said, it's got to be used against you. Your words are going to be twisted by insurance companies and defense attorneys. And so just be careful about saying anything immediately after the wreck about not being hurt, because you really don't know until a couple of days later.
Right. Another thing that I've seen, and it didn't ultimately, I'll give an example, it didn't ultimately cause me to not be able to get this case settled for the full and fair value of the claim, but it did require me to file suit. It was a social media post.
Yeah.
I represent a young girl that had a disc injury. It was fairly bad. She played soccer at one of the local colleges, was not able to continue playing soccer. It kind of impacted her educational career, her athletic career. But there was a big hang up because the insurance company reached out to me and said, hey, look at this picture of your client riding a tube behind a boat on a lake, one of the Kentucky lakes. Mm-hmm. And I immediately was just floored and trying to figure out what was going on here. I called my client, and what had happened was a friend had posted like a Throwback Thursday picture of them from the summer before, which was prior to this injury. But looking at the post, it wasn't exactly clear. In order to clear that up, we had to file a suit. They ended up deposing my client. Ultimately, the story came out and they understood why this post was posted in the context, and we ultimately got it settled. But that post created unneeded, necessary work, time, and loss of getting the settlement, and cost and deposition and filing fees.
Yeah, I mean, I wish, social media didn't exist after you're in Iraq. I always advise people not to be on there. Like John said, people who are injured after wrecks, if something comes up and there's a picture that makes it seem like they're not, there's almost always a reasonable explanation for it. But the more that you have to explain away to strangers who you're asking for compensation after a wreck, the harder and harder things are. So that social media posts that make it seem like you're fine, that you're doing strenuous physical activity, that you're smiling and you don't appear to be in pain, something that simple. A lot of times the pain will come and go. After injuries like this, you can be smiling 1 second and pain another second. That's totally reasonable. Any doctor will tell you that's a reasonable thing. But a picture truly is worth 1,000 words, and sometimes it can be used against you.
Yeah, I recommend that you make sure that you set your settings to private, that only people that you're connected with can see your stuff. And ultimately, I would make no post during the pendency of your claim, if possible, just to avoid any issues.
Yeah, I'd just like clarify that a little bit. I mean, even if you set it to private, if you are forced to file suit to get full value, your social media can be accessed by the other side. Even if you have it set to private, courts have said that's still public things that you're sharing with close friends. That's what's called discoverable in a lawsuit. And I've seen courts order Facebook to disclose, thousands of photos and profiles that people have set private, so that the insurance company can dig through your entire life trying to find something to use against you.
Right. Couple other things. Give a recorded statement to an insurance company before you have counsel.
Don't do it. Always get an attorney to back you up on that. They will try to ask you deceiving questions, and they will use that against you.
Tim, the last thing, settling too early before you even know the full extent of your injuries.
Yeah, we see this a lot with people who don't have representation. Insurance companies will try to reach out to you right away and settle with you before you know the full extent of your injuries. It's kind of like getting out of the car and saying you're fine. But, if you have a back injury and your doctor tries conservative treatment for 6 months and then ultimately says you need surgery, if you settle that case within the 6 months, you're not getting paid for that surgery, because every case you have one chance to get the value of the case. Once you settle, you cannot go back and say, oh, I made a mistake and I need more money because I was hurt worse than I thought. Insurance companies don't play that way. Once you agree to take the money, that's all the money you're ever going to get. And we actually had a client who the insurance company tried to cram a $500 settlement down his throat. Thankfully, at the last minute, he told him that he would think about it. They actually sent him the check. He never deposited it. Called us first. We took a second look at the case, and we ultimately just settled that one for over $100,000.
Right.
So the insurance company very nearly saved $99,000. Essentially cheated this person out of almost $100,000 because they were cramming something down his throat without the opportunity. And we were able to get into that situation, save it, get full value for him, and ended up being a really good result.
And that's not the entirety of the situation. I mean, that's part of it. The other part is they're relying on the fact that oftentimes people that get injured are in now a financial jam with their family, their bills, and they're looking for a lifeline, even if it's discounted. So some people will accept something like that in desperation.
Yeah.
And a good lawyer will say, hey, pause. Let's figure out another option that you can get through with your medical bill or with your bills and all the other things you need to do, and realize, hey, this has much more value than maybe you think it does.
Yeah, there are many ways to try to help you out in the immediate cash crunch after a car wreck that don't involve you giving away the full value of your case.
All right, Rob, what's the last and biggest secret that probably, well, I know that lawyers know on our end, but the general public doesn't know?
So the final secret is kind of a two-part answer. One, the settlement value especially, not necessarily the trial value. The settlement value can depend on what insurance company is on the other side. Some insurance companies are more fair than others. Some are more reasonable in settling claims. But a secret value that really is common sense, but something that you don't always think about, and probably not for the reasons that you think, that can affect both the settlement and the trial value of your case, is the quality of the attorney that you hire, or if you have an attorney at all. I have been in 2 car wrecks myself, and since I'm an attorney and they know I'm an attorney, when I sent the letter of representation on my claim saying, I'd be representing myself, they actually changed the insurance adjuster. And so these insurance companies, they actually have entire departments who deal with unrepresented people.
Right.
And those are the things that we were telling you earlier, those recorded statements, the lowball offers, the getting you to try to give you documents that you don't have to give to them before suit's filed. Those are the things they try to cram down your throat in those departments. They train their people to take advantage of you. There's just no other way. There's no other way to say that, and it's absolutely true. When you get the attorney adjusters, goes into a whole other pot. They value the case differently at that point.
Right.
And then the quality of the attorney, in addition, insurance companies exist on information. And I have seen over the course of my career, and over the course of John's career and working here, as we've gotten better results for our clients, the tone of the insurance companies has changed.
Yes.
The value for our clients has gone up merely because our reputation has gotten better. And so, the quality of the attorney you pick matters. We are tracked in their systems. We are tracked about, how much value we get for people. We're tracked about how hard we fight if they don't offer a fair offer. Right. Some attorneys are not set up to go to trial at all. And so if you're sitting there at home, you're saying like, Rob, it's not a big secret that if you get a good attorney, you'll probably do better. But the reasoning for that is because the people who ultimately pay the compensation on these cases, they know who's good. And they know who is going to cost them money if they don't treat you fairly.
Well, let's define good real quick, because there's a lot of attorneys out there that I think that the general public has an opinion that they're good because they see them often in media, whatever. But that doesn't necessarily mean that it's good in the eyes of an insurance company. If I understand you correctly, the insurance company is going to believe that an attorney is good is if they regularly file claims that are undervalued from pre-lit. So in settlement offers, they don't take undervalued settlement offers. They're willing to file. They also move cases efficiently in litigation. They ask the right questions, and they're willing to try cases.
The number one factor is how often your attorney is willing to try a case. I've seen insurance forms about their internal valuation systems. I'm not going to tell you how I got those, but I've seen them before. And the number one factor that is consistent across different companies is that if you have an attorney who's willing to try a case and can try a case successfully in front of a jury, the value of your case goes up. All other things being equal, same injury, same car damage, same insurance limits, same everything that we've talked about in this video. If you get a lawyer who is willing to try your case, if the insurance company doesn't give you fair value and the insurance company knows that, the value of your case just went up.
Yep. All right. Well, thank you, Rob. Appreciate that information. I think that's valuable information I think that's valuable. Thank you, Rob, for that information. I think that's valuable information for the public in general. If you've been injured in a car wreck in Kentucky or Indiana, don't leave any money on the table. If you've been injured in a car wreck in Kentucky or Indiana, don't leave money on the table. Give Stein Whatley Astorino a call. Car wreck attorneys that will fight for you. Get the full and fair compensation you deserve. Stein Whatley Attorneys, serious results.